Namaskar and welcome to our special program on Geoeconomics. Today we'll discuss the Russian economy in the light of the re-election of the President Vladimir Putin of Russia till 2030. We'll put into context the Russian economy against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine and some 16,500 plus sanctions since the start of the war, a majority of them against individuals. Also, $300 billion of Russian assets have been frozen. The IMF, however, has raised its forecast for the Russian economy, for economic growth there this year, to 2.6% from 1.1% earlier. And the Russian economy had grown by 3.6% in 2023 after a contraction of 1.2% in 2022. So to put this into context, we have with us Dr. Kanwal Sibal, is a former Foreign Secretary and former Indian Ambassador to Russia and currently the Chancellor of India's Premier Institute, JNU. And Dr. Nilanjan Banik is an economist who specializes in international trade and development economics. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Dr. Sibal, let me start with you. High oil prices and the military-industrial complex, they seem to have helped Russia to avoid the impact of sanctions to a large extent. But, defense spending is gone up to about 6% of GDP. It's likely to go up. How would you view these two sectors going forward?
Well, Russia has weathered the sanctions. You just quoted the figures of the IMF in terms of its growth last year and this year. The expectation of the West that they will bring Russia down on its knees and convert the ruble into ruble have not materialized. Russia has now entered into a war economy, and the war economy, as you know, contributes to economic growth. What has actually happened is a couple of things. One, that because of sanctions and denial of access to the markets in Europe and the United States, and interruption of supply of lots of goods that Russia was buying from the West, including consumer goods. Russia has been pushed into developing local sources of production of the products that were denied to them. So in a sense, the sanctions have been good, as some argue, for the Russian economy. And President Putin himself has acknowledged that they were a bit unconcerned about developing their own economy and manufacturing and other things because they thought they had access to Western products. Now they've seen that this has actually hit them very hard, and they are now obliged to develop local alternatives. So that's given a push to the economy, and it will go down this road. Insofar as oil is concerned, first of all, China is very hungry for all raw materials from Russia, and Russia has huge natural resources, including oil and gas. So China is an obvious partner. They're contiguous. One pipeline already exists. The second pipeline is being constructed or being negotiated. India has taken advantage of the prices of the discounted oil from Russia as a result of Western sanctions, and it has become the largest supplier of oil to India. Of course, there's a little bit of a problem there because while payments for oil have been received by Russia, but many of the other products that they sell to us, fertilizers, coal, and this and that, there are difficulties there because of sanctions, and they've got huge surpluses stuck in Indian banks, which they're not able to use immediately. But nevertheless, this is a source of potential income from them. Sure. So all in all, I think Russia has defied predictions about being compelled compelled by sanctions to actually.
Clearly, its economy is very resilient. Let's bring in Dr. Banik. Dr. Banik, Russia has written off more than $20 billion of debt as well to the African countries. And it is also promising a Russia-Africa kind of special relationship in a multipolar world. Russia is the chief arms supplier to Africa, accounting for about 40% of all African imports and major weapon systems. So what kind of control does this also provide for other kinds of Russian exports? We know that grain was another key export that they had to Africa.
Mark, you have to realize this relationship between Russia and African nations are almost like the relationship India have had with Russia. It goes back to the Soviet Union era. So Russia, present-day Russia, is in no mood to give up that advantage with which it had over the last 40 or 50 years. Now, if you see what has happened after the war broke out, there was a dearth of food grain supply to most part of the African nations. And Russia, in a way, lapped up that opportunity by supplying as an alternate to Ukrainian wheat. They are now supplying most of the wheat which are going to the African countries are now originating from Russia. This year, I think almost 30 million metric tons of food grain have been shipped to African countries. In addition to that, like you mentioned, Russia has also been one of the major exporters of arms as well as nuclear civil technology to some of the African countries. So if you look into what is happening in Sudan, what is happening in Mali, or for that matter, what is happening in Central African Republic, most of the arms over there are being supplied by Russia. Not only arms, they are famously or infamously sending the Wagner group of mercenaries to fight alongside the African countries. Yeah. So what Russia is gaining in exchange of this, they are getting access to rare earth materials which are used for manufacturing semiconductors. They are also getting access to African gold. And in a way, it is a win-win situation for Russia because Russia is actually learning from China, because what China is doing, it is giving debt to most of the other countries and getting access to the mineral and other energy, which in a way is helping them in case of China to sustain their economy. Russia is also doing the same. By writing off the debt, they are getting access to South African gold and rare earth metals, which are very necessary for the Russian economy to continue.
So they're clearly getting something in exchange. But Dr. Sibal, you know, in 2023, Russia's energy revenues had reached 8.8 trillion rubles, which is well above the average for the last 10 years. So definitely its energy markets are not in decline. You did mention that China's hungry for these resources. India too has increased purchases of Russian energy. Is this what Putin was banking on when he, is continuing to pursue his military operation?
Well, insofar as China is concerned, this will be a long-lasting relationship. No doubt about that. Because, as I said, China needs energy, and Russia is next door, and they are contiguous, so there are no geographical barriers, as is the case between India and Russia. But insofar as India is concerned, the longer-term picture is not very clear, because for the time being, we are buying discounted Russian oil. And Russia, therefore, has displaced Iraq and Saudi Arabia as the largest source of oil to India. But going forward, when assuming that the situation becomes normal, then would we then revert to buying oil from Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and others, which were the earlier sources of oil, and automatically, therefore, lead to a reduction of reliance on Russian oil. So that is an issue which we have to look at in terms of the future. Now, we are actually we want natural gas from them,
yes.
LNG from them, especially from the Far East. We are willing to invest there. There is this whole project of the Vladivostok Far East, Vladivostok-Chennai corridor, yes, for trade. But this will need a lot of investment on both sides in terms of developing Far East resources. We have invested hugely in the Russian oil sector. In fact, the largest investments that have been made by Indian oil companies anywhere in the world is in Russia, and we're looking for more in more investments because Russia has proven oil and gas field, and therefore it's a very profitable form of investment. And now with Russia not being able to receive investment in this sector from the United States and Europe, they would look for investment from countries like India and not solely rely on China. But this is a longer term project. I wanted to make a point on Russia.
Go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Relationship with Africa and this and that. Insofar as the Central African Republic is concerned, China, of course, is present in a very strong way. But Russia has also been present because cobalt and other materials are available from there. And this precedes in a sense, the Ukraine war. And insofar as grain is concerned, Ukraine grain is still reaching international markets, but largely the European markets.
Yes.
And Russia has problems in exporting grain because their ships are not allowed to dock in any European port. And some of their shipments are stuck in European ports like Rotterdam. And they have said that if Europe allows these shipments to be released, then they can supply wheat free of cost to African countries. Now, the Dutch released some shipment, but some stocks that were lying there, but not all. So there is a bit of an issue there with regard to how much Russia can export its wheat to
Africa. Okay, Dr. Banik, reports also say that the Western businesses that had left Russia, they had to pay some levies, some sort of a fine or tax before they left Russia. And also those businesses that were left behind were quickly taken over by Russian management and they continued. Hence, they remained running concerns. How effective has this been since, they already had demand within Russia?
Mark, you see that Russia has done a very smart thing. You mentioned that the Western world, they have freezed almost 300 billion euro of Russian assets.
Yes.
What Russia did instead was they also put some kind of restriction on capital outflow from the Russian economy. And in addition to that, the Russian central bank, they smartly increased the rate of interest. Now, what has happened because of that, most of the foreign companies, because of capital restriction, they had to move out because Russia also put some sanction. And what eventually materialized was Russian companies, they actually started producing goods, which is almost perfect, I would say, substitute for the Western firms which are operating out of Russia. So instead of McDonald's, you now have Kusno and Tochka, which is almost the same kind of material you get from McDonald's. Instead of IKEA, which is being replaced by what they call Swede House. Instead of Dunkin', now you have Donato. Instead of Starbucks, they have Star Coffee. So yes. In terms of the product, there is no, I'd say it's almost the perfect substitute what the Russian firms are actually giving.
So same product with a different name.
Yes, same product with a different name. And because of this high restriction on capital outflow, and Russia also was the central bank, because they increased the rate of interest, you will find that compared to Eurozone and UK, they are able to put their GDP, gross fiscal deficit, under control. It is now 1% of the Russian GDP.
Okay.
Whereas for Euro, it is almost 3%. For UK, it is touching 6%, So some of the countries which are actually opposing to the Russian war, their economy is now in problem. On the other hand, the Russian economy is still resilient, like you mentioned, and for the factors I just now mentioned, because yes. Again, in terms of oil, what Russia is doing, they are using what they call shadow fleet. Shadow fleet is basically, it's a bunch of cargo vessels which are not insured. But who cares? So long these cargo vessels are reaching to the countries which is intended for. For instance, Russia is doing trade with China. It is doing trade with Turkey, Bulgaria, India, even Indonesia. And because of that, Russian oil, although the Western countries have put a cap of $60, they are getting sold at almost at the market price. And the market price right now is around 80 to 90 US dollar. So Russia is not actually losing out. It's the European countries, because what is happening, this oil, this crude are actually coming to Indonesia, India. They're getting
Absolutely.
refined.
So they're
And
finding new markets.
yes, and they
Right.
are the value addition is happening in developing Asia, and it's
Okay.
again going back to Europe and US. So that
Doc-
is what is happening. Yeah.
Sure. Ambassador Sibal, you know, Moscow's ties with West Asia and the Islamic world too have expanded. Russia believes there's an anti-America sentiment that can be exploited, apparently. How realistic is this? But, you know, figures also seem to show that trade has increased 68% with the UAE in 2022.
No, UAE has become the hub of trade between Russia and other countries. And not only that, a lot of Russian techies are now operating from UAE in order to be able to conduct their business. And the West has not been able to sanction the UAE. Putin has made a visit to UAE and Saudi Arabia, one of the very few countries that he has visited after he has been declared a war criminal by the West, and a warrant of arrest has been issued against him. Russia, as you know, is already well entrenched in Syria. They prevented the Syrian regime from collapsing.
Yes.
They have a naval base in Syria, which is extremely important for their naval presence in the Mediterranean. They have a military base there. And then, of course, you know, Russian-Iran relations have expanded, and Russia is now carrying on normal trade with Iran. And in fact, on the nuclear question, which has been a bit of a bugbear for the West, now you cannot imagine any cooperation between the West and Russia in terms of putting further restrictions, nuclear restrictions on Iran. Iranian drones have been sold to Russia and manufactured in Russia.
Yes.
More importantly, UAE and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and of course Ethiopia, which is across the Red Sea, and Iran, they have become member of BRICS.
Exactly. So,
And see how much gains Russia has made in terms of its presence in the Middle East by this development of these countries wanting to have more room for their diplomacy and are not bothered any longer about what the West may do in terms of pressure on them by joining BRICS.
Dr. Sibal, also, I mean, through SCO and BRICS Plus, Russia is focusing considerably on expanding its ties with Asia and supporting a non-Western world model. How welcome is Russia actually in the non-Western world? Because, I mean, after all, it is seen to be in violation of the UN Charter in this war in Ukraine.
Not really, not
really?
really. But the point is that, you know, when when you have to formally take a position, as we have also taken,
Right.
that you know, the respect for sovereignty of states and respect for the UN Charter and etc. These are positions that can be taken very easily. But look at the manner in which South Africa, let's say, which represents a major country in Africa, has been reaching out to Russia. Other African countries, the way they are, especially in West Africa, the way they have reached out to Russia. In fact, in the global South, which is fed up with Western double standards and all the pressures that are put on them, and of course, there's a history of colonialism and everything else, and the fact that they are highly indebted countries, but they don't see the West and the G7 being as concerned about their plight, but they see Russia as a friend, because Russia doesn't have a colonial past. Russia has not been exploiting them the way the Western countries have exploited them.
Yes.
As was rightly said by the other panelist, the Soviet Union was very open to Africa. They had the Patrice Lumumba University. So many of the elite or the African leaders have been educated in Russia. And Russia is, as you know, recently They have held conclaves with the African countries. So there's a lot of sympathy for Russia, which is in the global south, which is not at all happy in the way that the West is treating Russia. Apart from an island there, the fact that they're all very concerned that the West, by pursuing the kind of policies that it is pursuing in the Ukraine conflict, is risking an enlargement of the conflict and eventually may actually deteriorate into some kind of a nuclear standoff.
Okay.
Because there is no effort to talk peace, to engage in dialogue, and to find a solution of peace. It's also always more arms, more arms, more arms, more support to Ukraine so that Russia can be defeated on the battlefield and forced into negotiations, which to my mind is an illusion.
Not happening, yes. It doesn't seem likely. Dr. Banik, Putin in his speech after victory, he said that BRICS is going to account for 37% of global GDP compared to 28% by the G7 countries by 2028. Now, currently, Russia is the president of BRICS. And is this a realistic projection? What gives him this kind of optimism, apart from, India and China being in the non-Western world?
I think it's optimistic in the scenario that there are 26 countries which wanted to become member of BRICS alliance when the last meeting happened in South Africa, out of which BRICS, the present the membership was extended to 6 different countries, including UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Argentina. So basically what we are seeing that BRICS group of countries, as we speak, is contributing to almost 40% of the world population. So it's a huge market we are talking about. In addition to that, if you see what is happening, there is a trend happening, what we call de-dollarization. There is a trend happening that big countries like Russia, China, India, they are trying to trade in their own currency. And if that happens, there is another event which is also happening is most of the central bank around the world, in particular China, they are coming out with their own digital currency. Now, if you put the trade in local currency in addition to the digital currency, what does it tells you? It tells you that the dependence on the dollar is going to fall. And more, we are going to see a scenario where the countries are trading either in digital currency or they are trading in their local currency. Okay. And when that happens, you will see that the trade to be booming in this part of the world, the developing part of the world. Another thing I want to flag, you will see that now, if you were to trade with US or for that matter, Europe, they are putting the green clause saying that if you are not manufacturing without ensuring that the climatic condition is taken into account, you are not going to export. But if you're trading with Russia, China, Africa, because it's a developing countries, most of the countries in Africa are also less developed. Yes. They care a little bit less about the environmental clause. They care more about food. The priority is different, So what we are seeing is the BRIC economies is going to expand, and with the technology in terms of the digital currency and with the more emphasis put on the local currency, we are going to see the BRIC economy is going to expand. And as a matter of fact, right now, the G7 group of countries, you mentioned about that, it has actually, their total combination has contracted only to 40% of the GDP, which used to be world GDP, which used to be around 60% around a decade back,
So there is that the growing economies are within, are in the BRICS. I mean, that's why they were first created in the first place. But Dr. Banik, also India is believed to have saved roughly $7 billion by importing Russian oil. India has a comprehensive defense relationship as well, including co-producing sophisticated weapons and things like that. How important is India in terms of for the Russian economy, since we're looking at the economic benefits of this relationship?
It's a win-win game, because we need arms, we need technology, which Russians are more liberal as opposed to the US in terms of giving it to India. We are also getting at a much cheaper price if you look into the crude which are being imported from Russia. Now, if you look at the total import figures, it has increased by 7-fold over the last 1 year. And for reason, because we are getting at a cheaper price, this is actually creating value for the Indian big conglomerates, for instance, Reliance. They are actually converting that into finished oil, a refined petroleum product, and then they are exporting to the rest of the world. So it's a good news for India that we are able to trade with Russia in terms of the energy, in terms of, and also we are able to export it.
We are running short of time, Dr. Sibal. India's total exports to Russia rose 46.2% year on year in 2023. Imports rose 54.8%. It's pretty clear that, the two countries are gaining this mutual importance. The West is also keen to trade with India. Hence, India clearly, has strategic autonomy. How effectively can India collaborate with Russia for, things of the future like semiconductors and things like that?
Well, I think insofar as the critical and emerging technologies are concerned, our principal partner is the United States of America. And we have put, of course, cooperation in this area also on the core agenda. But it will be the United States of America because it's ICET, which is chaired by the National Security Advisor on both countries, will open doors, though progress so far has been slow. And then, as you know, our entire our IT sector is very intimately, deeply linked with the Silicon Valley, with the Americans. And in future areas of artificial intelligence and everything else, the progress will be there because India has talent and the United States accepts that Indian talent can be leveraged by them in a win-win situation where both sides cooperate to make sure that they remain ahead in this sector where China has made tremendous progress. Insofar as Russia is concerned, because of sanctions and the difficulties they have to access Western technology, the scope is limited there, frankly. But yes, in terms of if we can do that, joint co-production and development in the defense sector, more mutual investments in the oil and trade sector, in Russian raw materials, which we need. There are very considerable prospects there. In the pharmaceutical sector, there is a huge prospect, though Russians are traditionally reluctant to trade with India in this sector. But now, with their back to the wall, there are possibilities. And the consumer goods sector, China is supplying them, but we can also.
I'm afraid we've run short of time, but the final word from you, Dr. Banik. We haven't really talked too much about China. China's 2023 two-way trade with Russia was an all-time high again, $240 billion. It was another record, growing by 26.3% from the previous year. So do you see China's economy getting a boost from Russia? Because, after all, the Chinese economy is actually having a tough time at the current time. And how is it going to affect global supply chains?
Yeah, China is definitely going to gain. The biggest loser in this game is Japan and also the European Union countries. China's consumption is falling, as you know, but this is going to give a fillip in the sense that they're getting the energy at a cheaper price from Russia, which hopefully will actually able to prop up their economy.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Kanwal Sibal and Dr. Nilanjan Banik. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this interesting subject of Russia over the next 6 years under Putin. Now, and the economy, that is. Now, Russia clearly has an advantage in the war as well because it has greater staying power and military might than Ukraine. Ukraine is propped up by the Western allies who are unsure actually about the extent to which they are going to be funding the Ukraine defense. Yet, they are vowing to continue until Russia is defeated without willing to enter the war directly because that's a dangerous game. So this stalemate increases Russia's ability to utilize its vast natural resources to support and sustain non-Western or neutral economies. That's what's happening. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.